So how many of you were going, what if God was one of us? With me right here. We were your pips. We were your pips. You guys are awesome. Christian, Jew, Muslim, shaman, Zoroastrian, stone, ground, mountain, river. Each one has a secret way of being with the mystery, unique, and not to be judged. The immortal poet Rumi says that. And in so doing, he is at one with our Unitarian Universalist heart. He is at one with our Unitarian Universalist history. In 1568, the first and only Unitarian king in all of history, King John Sigismund, declared, "In every place the preachers shall preach and explain the gospel, each according to his understanding of it. And if the congregation like it, well. If not, no one shall compel them, for their souls would not be satisfied. But they shall be permitted to keep a preacher whose teaching they approve. Therefore, none of the superintendents or others shall annoy or abuse the preachers on account of their religion, or allow any to be imprisoned or punished by removal from his post on account of his teachings. For faith is the gift of God." A person's faith, it's their secret way of being with the mystery, and it cannot be compelled by any external source. It can't even be compelled by the person in question, gritting their teeth and trying to force themselves to believe. It comes from a place within that's deeper than trying. It comes from the soul. It comes from God. For almost 500 years, this has been our tradition. Tolerance is synonymous with who we are. But it is nevertheless complicated. It is confusing. At times, it is tolerance that leads us to allow bad behavior in our congregations. We don't hold offenders accountable because tolerance. A few years back, on a UU minister's email chat, there was a thread on this particular topic, and one story had to do with a congregant who regularly laced the Sunday morning coffee with LSD. Oh, I'm not lying. Some of you are like, yeah, and you know what? The leadership of that congregation didn't do anything about it for a year because tolerance. Another story had to do with a congregant who was known by a few folks as a sexual violator. And he began preying on the women in the congregation, and leadership did nothing. Yet another story, all sorts of stories actually here, about individuals who would berate others viciously in public and on email, and people sort of sighed and tolerated it. Is this truly what tolerance requires of us? Confusion can also hound us as we consider ideas and convictions. The Reverend Kathleen Korb says, "I once got in serious trouble with a fellow UU for what she considered my intolerance in religion. How dared I say that Unitarian Universalism is better in any way than other religions? Our truth is just as partial as that of others, as indeed, of course, it is. All I could legitimately say," she felt, "is that Unitarian Universalism is better for me than other religions are." But then, Reverend Korb goes on to say, "It always seems strange to me that after saying this with all sincerity, we get so upset when our children grow up and they choose to become Roman Catholics, or fundamentalist born-again Christians, or Scientologists." Now, would this make King John Sigismund proud? No one disagreeing because disagreement feels too judgy. No one debating ideas about religion and human nature and politics, because the whole idea of progress from error towards greater truth feels threatening. What would our ancestors, who gave their very lives in service to our faith and theirs, what would they say? And what would they say about times we have been silent in the face of oppression? Now, offensiveness is one thing. Offensiveness can be the atrocious table manners of kids, or that person who keeps on checking text messages while talking to you. You know who they are. Offensiveness is no respecter of persons. We can all be offensive. I don't care what your race, sex, class is. It makes people feel uncomfortable. It hurts your feelings. But oppression reinforces the status of marginalized folks. Oppression is when someone tells a racist or a sexist joke, and it's not just about hurt feelings, it is political. The humor acts like a drug on bystanders. It releases inhibitions. It makes it okay to go along with the discrimination. It solidifies it even further. It solidifies injustice. Does tolerance extend even to these sorts of things? Might we even measure the degree of our virtue by how hard we work to shut up and say nothing and do nothing? When, for example, he who shall not be named recently told his supporters at a rally in North Carolina that Second Amendment people could deal with she who shall not be named in case she is elected president. You know what I'm talking about, right? That little assassination joke. Does tolerance demand that we do nothing? Does tolerance demand that we pretend nothing happened? Now, I know I'm asking a lot of rhetorical questions, and some of the answers might seem obvious, but when we try to hold folks accountable for their bad behavior, we really can get called out as intolerant. When we stand up for what we believe, we really can get called out. We can even call ourselves out. We can fall into anxious hand-wringing when, for example, we sense our disgust, we sense our anger in ourselves towards conservative evangelical Christians who condemn GLBTQ people as morally perverse and as going straight to hell. We sense the disgust and the anger in ourselves which flows out of a very correct insight, an insight that conservative evangelical Christians reinforce larger cultural prejudices with their hate speech and give covert permission to those who are inclined to take their prejudices and translate them into violence. When we sense our anger and disgust towards this, we call ourselves out. We wring our hands and we beat our chests. We say we need to be more tolerant. And you better believe, we get called out by conservatives. One popular meme goes, "I'm a tolerant liberal. Agree with me or else, you racist, sexist, homophobic, Islamophobic, inbred, redneck, Bible-thumping, NASCAR-loving, gun-toting, America-loving bigots." Woo! We are charged with liberal hypocrisy, and we may well wonder, are they right? We seem so far away from the sweet, pure insight of Rumi, according to which each of us has a secret way of being with the mystery, unique and not to be judged. We seem so far away from our beautiful Unitarian King, the only one in history whose edict on toleration was a watershed moment in the history of the West. We are lost, and we need to find our way home, and that is the outrageous intent of this sermon in our remaining time together. It starts by thinking through the paradox of toleration, which can be expressed simply as, if tolerant folks express intolerance, how then can they claim to be tolerant? Mic drop, right? The implication here is that we have a moral duty to allow what is morally wrong. But that can't be right, right? But the paradox seems to drive us into that corner, straight there. Now let's think this thing through. Imagine an obnoxious person who, when others disagree, rails at them, insults them, hounds them, taunts them, and in the end is the only person talking because everyone else is just too afraid to make a peep. What has happened here is the collapse of a space of toleration in which free, meaningful speech thrives. Speech is meaningful and free when many people get to talk, and what is expressed has genuine informational content. Speech is not free. Speech is not free when only one person is talking. And it is not meaningful when all the talk is simply a matter of rudeness and insult. And so, to preserve the space of toleration here, we must expel the obnoxious person if they intend to persist in their obnoxiousness. Now, yes, from a distance, this can appear like we are being the bullies, but we are up close to the situation. We know the truth of what is going on. We are saying no to the bully in order to preserve a tolerant space for meaningful free speech for everyone willing to participate. If we do not say no, then intolerance becomes absolute. This is what New York Times writer David Brooks is addressing in his fantastic article from a bunch of months ago entitled "The Governing Cancer of Our Time," where he is grappling with the rising phenomenon of people who are against politics. He writes, "We live in a big, diverse society. There are essentially two ways to maintain order and get things done in such a society: politics or some form of dictatorship." David Brooks goes on to define politics in pretty much the way I've described that space of toleration that allows for free, meaningful speech. He says politics is that activity in which you recognize the simultaneous existence of different groups and interests and opinions. You try to find some way to balance or reconcile or compromise those interests, or at least a majority of them. The downside of politics is that people never really get everything they want. It is messy, limited. No issue is ever really settled. Disappointment is normal, but that's sort of what's beautiful in politics, too. It involves an endless conversation in which we learn about other people and we see things from their point of view and try to balance their needs against our own. But David Brooks goes on to say, over the past generation, we have seen the rise of a group of people who are against politics. These groups, best exemplified by the Tea Party, but not exclusively to the right, want to elect people who have no political experience. They want outsiders. They delegitimize compromise and deal-making. They are willing to trample the customs and rules that give legitimacy to decision-making if it helps them get power. Ultimately, they don't recognize other people. They suffer from a form of political narcissism in which they don't accept the legitimacy of other interests and opinions. They don't recognize restraints. They want total victories for themselves and their doctrine. That's David Brooks describing a very real collision of two mutually exclusive ways of being. And we feel this collision every day in America. We do. And we cannot allow the paradox of toleration to mess with our minds. It's just the way it is. To preserve politics, to preserve the space of toleration that enables free, meaningful speech for everyone who wants to participate, we must say no to the bully. We must be gentle, angry people. Which takes us to a second insight that can help clear up confusion around tolerance and bring us home. It's this: disentangling from moments when we are standing up to the bully, when we are being gentle, angry people, and the bully responds with outrage, with blowback, with pushback. He invokes liberal hypocrisy, or better yet, he invokes political correctness. Alyssa Rosenberg in the Washington Post offers something quite trenchant in a recent article entitled, now listen, "Politically incorrect ideas are mostly rude, not brave." She writes, "When Donald Trump took the podium in Cleveland at the Republican National Convention last month, he promised voters that I will present the facts plainly and honestly." There's more to that, but I just thought I'd pause there just to breathe. Preaching's hard, you know. "I will present the facts plainly and honestly. We cannot afford to be so politically correct anymore." She goes on to acknowledge that, indeed, Trump claimed the Republican nomination by exploiting a pre-existing sense that important truths were going unspoken in American public life and positioning himself as the only one, the only person daring enough to say them. But now, Alyssa Rosenberg gets to the heart of it. But what if things, she says, what if things people have held themselves back from saying for fear of social censure aren't inherently meaningful? The sad truth about so much supposed truth-telling is that their supposed transgressions aren't remotely risky. They're just rude. Presenting commonplace unpleasantness as an act of moral courage is a nifty bit of reframing. This formulation allows its practitioners to treat their own laziness, meanness, and self-indulgence as ethically and politically meaningful when in fact they are anything but. In other words, when a bully charges others with being PC, they are throwing down the red herring. They are wanting to create a huge distraction. They're wanting to get things off track. They don't like how things are changing in the world. They don't like the feeling of losing power. They don't like how people who haven't had very much power are getting some. So they claim PC as some kind of trump card, and it makes it sound like they're the ones being victimized. Important truths are going unspoken, they warn in apocalyptic tones. But the only unspoken truth here, the only one, is the shameful truth of the bully's sense of entitlement to keep on bullying, to keep on being able to name other people's reality. That's all. Saying no to the bully is just a good kind of intolerance, which is justice. This is the final thing that needs to be said, and we are home. Not all kinds of intolerance are alike. It's analogous to the situation with cholesterol. One kind, you betcha, is very bad. That's the LDL kind. But there is another kind called HDL that is actually very good for you. The more of it you got in your system, the better. Same thing goes for the body politic. There is a certain kind of intolerance that strengthens the heart of the body politic, makes it healthier. I am talking about the justice kind. Justice says no to the LSD in the Sunday morning coffee. Some of you look disappointed. Sorry. We really wouldn't have to worry so much about like worship time if we were all just like, woo! My sermons would be easier. I just flash lights up here and say random things. Justice says no to that. Justice says no to all the bad behavior in congregations and elsewhere. Justice says no to all the jokes that make bystanders think that oppression is okay. Justice says no to jokes about assassination. Justice calls conservative evangelical Christians out for their complicity in helping to sustain a culture of violence towards GLBTQ people. Justice does not allow people who are against politics to run Congress. Justice doesn't feel ashamed of itself when PC is invoked. Justice says no to the bully. And once we get clear on that, then and only then can we get clear on what tolerance truly asks of us. Tolerance asks us to create spaces where people don't have to think alike to love alike. It says, have your opinions. Believe what you believe. Hold on to the faith that comes to you from a place that is deeper than trying, a place within that is deeper than trying. You really can tell another person, I disagree, but be respectful, be kind. If your faith is a gift of God, so is theirs. And be open to the possibility that they may have a piece of the truth that you lack. Try walking in their shoes for a time. See what happens. See what you find. That is what tolerance truly asks for. And it also asks this: to be supremely, resolutely clear on how terribly fragile it really is, how easily overwhelmed by bullies of all kinds. Justice is the precondition for tolerance. If there is no King John Sigismund, there is no edict of Torda. There is no edict of toleration. Sustain justice. Do that. And the Christian and the Jew and the Muslim and the shaman and the Zoroastrian and the Unitarian Universalist and the stone and the ground and the mountain and the river, they can all each have their secret way of being with the mystery, unique and not to be judged. Sustain justice. And history will not have to record, as Dr. King has said, that the greatest tragedy was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. Be gentle, angry people.